Bonjour, danse, zongebene sienene tishnakas kanutotem. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Clayton Thomas-Muller. I'm a Cree man from Pugatawagan First Nation in northern Manitoba. It's a small Cree community on the mouth of the Churchill River on the border of Saskatchewan and Manitoba at about the 56th parallel. And just to give you an idea where that's at, if anybody know where Grand Forks is? See a show of hands. Yeah, so if you go to Grand Forks and then you just beeline it straight north, about 12 hours, you should get to where my people call home. It's north of Chief Crate, who spoke earlier this morning. So just a little bit farther north, just a little bit. Anyway, I too am really humbled to be here. It's a real honor to share the stage with Alana. I've been working with Alana for quite a few years, at least for us. We're both still pretty young, and I had the honor of being one of the IEN staffers who supported the formation of the Red Oil Network, and they've been kicking butt ever since. And so, aside from the formalities, introducing myself, I also just want to acknowledge in a good way this traditional territory that we are guests in. I'm humbled to be here as a guest, and I wanted to let those ancestors of this territory, and acknowledge that doorway that exists out there in front of our entrance, that sacred fire. And just to say that as a guest, I walk lightly here, and I'm really happy that we've been so well taken care of. And when I go home, I will let my people know how well I was fed and cared for and all that sort of thing. I also want to acknowledge all the partners and just organizers, everybody that came together to pull this gathering together, and those that traveled so far, especially our relations from the south, our brothers and sisters who traveled up from Ecuador, and also just to send a greeting to everybody who's logged in right now on the World Wide Web, and just to say how happy I am that we're all able to spend some time over the next couple days to talk about, the rights of Mother Earth, this legal regime that as Indigenous peoples we understand and recognize within our natural laws, but that we're trying to, in a good way, help our younger relations here in North America, the settlers, and really folks all across Mother Earth, reconnect with, as we go through a process of reevaluating our relationship to the sacredness of Mother Earth. And so my responsibilities with IEN circle around fighting against the world's largest construction project ever in the history of mankind. I'm the tar sands campaign director for IEN. For the last 5 years, I've been working with a very sophisticated and empowered and just incredible team of people from all across Alberta, and all across Turtle Island, and really all across the planet to fight against this massive, massive development, if you can even call it that, in northern Alberta. Next. As you can see here by this map, the tar sands represents a region in northern Alberta that is recognized as the third largest recoverable oil reserve on the planet. Although it shouldn't really even be called oil, bitumen is mixed with about 90% sand and clay and buried under one of the most important carbon sinks on the planet, the second largest intact forest on the planet, the boreal forest. And the tar sands, are underneath this forest, which is home to Cree, Dene, and Métis Indigenous peoples who have utilized the Athabasca River and the Mackenzie River watershed, which represents a sixth of North America's freshwater resources, for time immemorial. Now, this deposit has about 1.7 trillion barrels of oil in it, but with today's current technology for extraction, it represents an oil reserve approximately 170 billion barrels in size, and covers a landmass of 140,000 square kilometers, as you can see here, roughly the size of England and Wales combined, or the state of Florida. The communities that are most directly impacted by the tar sands extraction is Cree and Dene and Métis communities, most notably the 5 First Nations of the Athabasca region, which of course are Mikisew Cree Nation, Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, Prairie Chippewa First Nation, Fort McMurray First Nation, and of course Fort McKay First Nation. But also throughout the area around the boomtown of Fort McMurray, there is also many Métis locals. And in Canada, we have 3 constitutionally recognized Indigenous groups. That is, of course, the Inuit in our Arctic region, the First Nations, which number approximately 636 communities across the country, and of course our Métis settlements, which is a unique cultural group with their own constitutionally enshrined, recognized Aboriginal rights, and with their own unique language and cultural practices and whatnot. All of these groups fundamentally rely upon that sacred relationship to Mother Earth expressed through our hunting and fishing culture. Those rights that we, enjoy and that we, fight so hard to preserve and protect, and that our ancestors died for so that we could continue our way of life, are constitutionally enshrined within the Canadian Constitution, Section 23, and also protected by a number of internationally recognized treaties between the Crown and our communities and various other agreements. But the tar sands itself, just to give you an idea, this is just a freak science fiction nightmare. They're using the world's largest earth movers. These earth movers are 10 stories high. They move 300 tons per load. There are trucks operating 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in the tar sands that are 3 stories high, that carry, again, 300 tons per load. And they're going 24/7. There are 77,000 workers required to make the tar sands happen. They have moved enough earth in the tar sands that is larger than the 10 biggest hydroelectric dams on the planet, the Great Wall of China, the pyramids, the Great Pyramids, and the Suez Canal combined. Every single day in the tar sands, they move enough earth to fill up the Toronto Sky Dome. The amount of natural gas that is required to produce the current levels of production of 1.5 million barrels per day is 600 million cubic feet of natural gas, which could heat 2.4 million Canadian homes every single day. And Canada's cold. It's cold as shit there, and our houses are big. So it's a whole lot of energy cannibalism going on to produce this oil for foreign markets, like here in the United States, our biggest trading partner. Now, of course, aside from the immense carbon footprint of all this heavy machinery, this natural gas that's being burnt, there is a tremendous cost in terms of water. For every barrel of oil that is produced in the tar sands, you're looking at 3 to 4.6 barrels of fresh water, upwards to 6 barrels of fresh water for every barrel of oil produced. For every barrel of oil equivalent of energy invested into the tar sands, you get 3 barrels of oil return. Now, just to give you a context of that, in Saudi Arabia, for every barrel of oil equivalent of energy invested there, you get 100 barrels of oil in return. And that's why I use the term energy cannibalism. Now, the water, is just such a critical issue, because in the tar sands, you have a series of tailings ponds, vast lakes of toxic waste, a toxic soup of heavily concentrated heavy metals, volatile organic compounds, all kinds of toxicities, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in 21 varieties, all of which cause cancer, autoimmune deficiencies, and a host of destruction within the Athabasca River watershed. These tailings ponds are so large you can see them from outer space. They cover a landmass 170 square kilometers in size, and they represent the world's largest by volume dams, in terms of content. Now, the most heavily studied of these series of 10 tailings ponds is the Suncor Tailings Pond number 1, which leaches approximately 11 million liters per day. That's a liter is a quart, okay? So do the math. 4 quarts is a gallon, 11 million quarts per day, going into the Athabasca River, into the groundwater sources, flowing downstream, hitting communities like Fort Chipewyan, 240 kilometers downstream on the Athabasca Delta, which is a World Heritage, UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's the second largest freshwater delta on the planet, home to millions, tens of millions of migratory bird species, of moose, fish, beavers, geese, ducks, you name it, all yummy, delicious food sources for our people. But hunters from Fort Chipewyan, from the Mikisew Cree, from Fort McKay Cree Nation, and other First Nations have repeatedly, when pulling apart muskrats, a very sacred food source, when pulling apart their homes or beaver dams, have smelled petroleum. Muskrats and beavers have bleeding noses. Moose in the area have been found to have arsenic levels in their meat, 600 times the acceptable levels. They're filled with tumors. Entire kills are being left because people are too afraid to eat them. The fish have tumors and pustulous kind of growths and sores, ulcers, you name it. And so people are afraid to eat the food, but they do, because that's who we are. And our social systems, our culture, our language, our very identity is woven in the vessels of these practices, the stories, the words, all of the oral history associated to this hunting and fishing culture are vessels of our identity, of our collective historical knowledge of how to live in harmony with that particular place where Creator placed our people. And it's being destroyed. The amount of earth required to produce a barrel of tar sand synthetic crude is 4 tons. So for every 4 tons of earth, they make 1 barrel of oil. And as you can see, it's a globally significant threat. It represents vast climate change, climate destabilization, which already is resulting in 300,000 people per year dying as a result of the ongoing violent and unpredictable weather that we're seeing all across the planet. Our treaties are being consistently threatened and infringed upon. We're furthering America and the world's oil addiction. We're seeing big oil attempting to hardwire a dirty, outdated energy source into our economy for the next century in the form of pipelines, the Keystone XL, the Trailbreaker number 9 Enbridge, the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline, which my colleague Reuben George and his nation are fighting against in Vancouver, BC, the Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline, the Alaska Natural Gas, the Mackenzie Valley Gas Pipelines, which are feedstock for tar sands expansion. And when they run out of natural gas, do you know what industry wants to do? They want to build 13 nuclear reactors and nuclearize the tar sands and use nuclear energy to produce the steam to separate the oil from the sand and the clay. Water contamination, human health, food sovereignty, and fundamental human rights are being shattered as a result of big oil, the government of Canada, European Union, United States of America, and China's insatiable appetite for this dirty, outdated energy source. Now, IEN and dozens of other NGOs have answered the call of local communities that have asked us to come in and support their treaty rights, support their inherent rights, and to protect and stand up for those that cannot speak for themselves, and we have done so by creating the Canadian Indigenous Tar Sands Campaign and using our environmental justice framework to support the building of an inclusive movement that is led by our Indigenous peoples in an environmental justice social movement framework to fight against this destruction that I'm describing to you. We have been supporting the 5 First Nations in Athabasca, but those communities that have stood up to the tar sands have doubled in size. And we have seen a host of actions led by our Native people, not just direct actions that, civil disobedience or protests, but also actions rooted in our culture, in our prayers. The Healing Walk 2010 is the greatest example of that. This was an action that was only meant for prayer, that was led by our spiritual people right through the heart of the tar sands. And it took place again in 2011. And I wanted to highlight this particular action because this is fundamentally the core of how IEN, all of our staff, our board, walk. Everything we do, we take to our bundles. We pray about in our sweat lodge, in our sun dances, in our big houses. All of our staff come from impacted communities. Even myself, Chief Dave Craig talked about Manitoba Hydro. Well, in northern Manitoba, same thing, same story in my community. A lot of our ancestors, our sacred sites, are under massive hydroelectric reservoirs so that Minnesotans can have cheap electricity. Well, that's the same story for a lot of our IEN staffers. So we know what we're talking about and how important it is to lift up, first and foremost, that spiritual-based approach to fighting against these entities that have become so disconnected from the principles of upholding natural law and the rights of Mother Earth. But we've also seen many other actions, including campaigns that have emerged led by First Nations like the Yinkadeni Alliance, the Wet'suwet'en, Unistoten clan in the interior British Columbia, by the Oglala Lakota, by the Sac and Fox in Oklahoma, by the Caddo Nation in Texas, and by international allies all across the planet. IEN has partnered with groups in England from the UK Climate Camp to hit BP, Shell, Total, and all the European oil majors and banking institutions invested in the tar sands. We have hit, we've done actions on the Parliament Hill at the UN Climate Framework Convention on Climate Change, calling out the Canadian government and their meddling in a post-Kyoto climate agreement. We have seen resistance emerge and Indian cowboy alliances emerge to fight against the proposed heavy haul, massive refinery components shipped via barge and truck through the Midwest of the United States, through the Rocky Mountain Energy Corridor, en route to the tar sands. We've seen communities rise up in Montana and South Dakota to stop those heavy haul shipments, face arrest. We have seen tar sands action mobilization at the White House this year in 2012, which was the largest act of civil disobedience that the steps of the White House had seen since the Vietnam War, where over 1,000 people were arrested, standing up against this destructive scientific experiment that I'm describing. In Ottawa, we've seen over 200 people face arrest in the largest act of civil disobedience that the country of Canada had ever seen on the steps of its parliament. And now in 2012, this growing international movement led by our people continues to grow. And we see, the conclusion of the hunger strike by brave children and youth in Bella Bella, British Columbia. Mad shout out to anybody in BC who's watching, who did a fast and prayed. And what that resulted in, this hunger strike, it resulted in the National Energy Board actually canceling one of the days of the hearings of the Joint Review Panel on the Enbridge Gateway Pipeline. And we've seen Bella Bella today pull out of the National Energy Board hearings on Enbridge for the National Energy Board violating the trust relationship between Bella Bella First Nation and the government. And we've seen in solidarity the Oglala Lakota, led by grassroots activists like Deborah Whiteplume and her partner Alex Whiteplume and others in Oglala, also do a hunger strike in solidarity. And So what does this all mean in conclusion? I just want to say that there's many ways you can take action on this issue. You know, it's one of the things I often say to people everywhere I speak is that climate change is the civil rights issue of our generation. But it also impacts every segment of our fragile ecosystem. And there are many that cannot speak for themselves. And as Indigenous peoples, we know the responsibilities the Creator has put upon us. We know that we have to, protect that sacred circle of life, that we are a part of it. And that, we have a tremendous burden upon our shoulders that we have carried and we will continue to carry. But we need help from our allies, our white allies and our international allies, to join this struggle to lift up a new legal regime, a jurisprudence rooted in defending the rights of our sacred rivers, of our sacred mountains, of our forests, and all living beings that, call our Mother Earth home. They all have rights as well. And as Indigenous peoples, we have maintained the protection of those things for time immemorial. And that can be expressed through our stories that we've passed down. And we need to continue to expand this social movement, the biggest social movement that humanity has ever seen. And we need to break down those divisions, those race, class, north, south, gender, sexual, whatever isms that exist that fracture our movement. We need to develop the mechanisms to deal with those in a good and healthy way so that we can truly break down the systemic racism and barriers that we face and build a new paradigm that takes into consideration the sacred, and that takes into consideration and reinforces and asserts and uplifts that sacred feminine creative principle as the guiding light for a new economic paradigm, a new political, social, and spiritual paradigm for the members of the five-fingered race. For more information on our work fighting the Canadian tar sands and extreme energy all across the planet, please feel free to follow me on Twitter, follow IEN on Twitter, join our Facebook group, the Tar Sands, Canadian Indigenous Tar Sands Facebook group, sign up for our newsletter, and feel free to contact me anytime. I'm very accessible. Contact our other IEN staffers. All are intimately connected to our energy and climate work. And I want to thank you again very much for allowing me to share today a little bit about these responsibilities. Thank you.